The marble halls of the Washington County Courthouse had seen countless cases over its century-old existence, but none quite like what unfolded on that crisp autumn morning. The air was charged with tension as people filed into Courtroom 302, where a routine traffic violation hearing was about to become anything but ordinary. At the center of this brewing storm was State Representative Thomas Green, a man whose 20 years in politics had cultivated an air of untouchability around him. His perfectly pressed suit and commanding presence usually turned heads, but today, all eyes were fixed on the distinguished figure presiding over the courtroom, Judge Patricia Wilson. Judge Wilson had earned her position through decades of unwavering dedication to justice. Her reputation for fairness and sharp legal mind had earned her widespread respect in the legal community. However, her appointment as the first black woman to serve on the county court bench had not sat well with certain traditional power circles. The case itself was simple. Representative Green had been caught driving 30 miles over the speed limit in a school zone. Any other citizen would have quietly paid the fine, but Green had demanded his day in court, confident that his position would shield him from consequences. As the bailiff called the court to order, Green's demeanor shifted from merely confident to openly dismissive. He barely acknowledged the traditional "all rise" announcement, remaining seated until his attorney quietly urged him to stand. Judge Wilson noticed but maintained her professional composure, something she had mastered over years of facing subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. "Mr. Green, you're here today concerning a traffic violation that occurred on September 15, Judge Wilson began, her voice clear and measured. "The officer's report indicates you were traveling at 45 miles per hour in a 15-mile-per-hour school zone." Green interrupted her, something few dared to do in her courtroom. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, emphasizing the title with a tone that suggested anything but respect, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who I am." The gallery tensed. Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow slightly, her expression remaining neutral despite the clear challenge in Green's voice. "Representative Green, in this courtroom, everyone is equal under the law. Your occupation does not grant you special privileges when it comes to children's safety." Green's face flushed red. He leaned forward, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtroom. "I've been serving this community since before you were appointed by some diversity quota. I know how things work around here." The words hung in the air like smoke, causing several gasps from the gallery. The court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype machine. Even Green's attorney visibly winced, knowing his client had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Judge Wilson sat perfectly still, her gaze steady and unflinching. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. The old walls of Courtroom 302 had witnessed many dramatic moments, but what was about to unfold would be remembered for years to come. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor as Judge Wilson finally moved, straightening the papers before her with deliberate care. The next few minutes would demonstrate to everyone present, including the arrogant politician, why she had earned her position through merit, not quotas, and why crossing a judge in her own courtroom was never wise, regardless of one's political status. The tension in Courtroom 302 could have been cut with a knife. Representative Green's words about diversity quotas still echoed off the walls, but Judge Wilson's response would demonstrate why she had earned every step of her journey to the bench. "Representative Green," she began, her voice carrying a calm authority that made everyone lean forward slightly. "Since you've brought up the matter of experience, let me share some of mine with the court." She adjusted her reading glasses, taking her time as she spoke. "Before sitting on this bench, I spent 15 years as a prosecutor with a 92% conviction rate. Prior to that, I served as a public defender for 7 years, never losing a single case to improper procedure. I graduated top of my class from Yale Law School, and I've authored 3 books on constitutional law that are currently used in law schools across the country." The gallery watched as Green's expression shifted from smugness to uncertainty. His attorney was frantically scribbling notes, likely preparing for damage control. But Judge Wilson wasn't finished. "Now, let's discuss your experience with the law, Representative," she continued, lifting a folder from her bench. "I have here your driving record for the past 5 years. Would you like me to read it to the court, or would you prefer to focus on today's violation?" Green's face, which had been red with anger, now paled slightly. His attorney quickly stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to apologize for my client's earlier remarks and focus on the current citation." But the representative wasn't ready to back down entirely. "Your Honor," he interrupted again, though his voice had lost some of its previous bravado, "while my comments may have been poorly phrased, I still believe my position entitles me to some consideration. The people of this county elected me, the people of this county," Judge Wilson interjected smoothly, "elected you to uphold the law, not break it. When you chose to drive at 3 times the speed limit in a school zone, you weren't just breaking the law, Representative Green. You were betraying the trust of every parent who sends their child to that school." She lifted a photograph from her desk. "This was taken by the school's security camera at the time of your violation. Would you like to know what it shows?" She didn't wait for his response. "It shows children leaving their after-school program. Children whose safety you endangered." The courtroom had grown so quiet that the gentle whir of the air conditioning seemed thunderous. Several people in the gallery were nodding in agreement with the judge's words, including a woman who clutched her purse tightly, likely a parent herself. Green's attorney once again attempted to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, if we could return to the matter of the citation, we never left it, Counselor," Judge Wilson replied. "Every detail I've mentioned is relevant to these proceedings." She turned her attention back to Green, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Representative, you came into my courtroom today expecting special treatment. Instead, you're going to receive something far more valuable, a lesson in true public service." The gallery watched in rapt attention as Judge Wilson reached for another document on her bench. The morning sun had climbed higher, and the shadows in the courtroom had shifted, but the tension remained thick in the air. Whatever was coming next, it was clear that Representative Green's day in court was about to become a powerful reminder that justice, when properly served, knows no privilege or position. Judge Wilson's next words sent a ripple through the courtroom. "Officer Rodriguez, please approach the bench." From the back of the courtroom, a police officer in his dress uniform stood and made his way forward. He was the one who had issued the citation to Representative Green, and the politician's eyes narrowed at his appearance. "Officer, please tell the court what you observed on the afternoon of September 15th, Judge Wilson requested, her tone professional and measured. Officer Rodriguez stood at attention, his voice clear and steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I was monitoring traffic near Springfield Elementary when I observed the representative's vehicle traveling at high speed through the school zone. My radar confirmed 45 miles per hour. When I initiated the traffic stop, I immediately recognized Representative Green." The officer paused, glancing briefly at Green before continuing. "The representative immediately informed me of his position and suggested that I was, quote, making a career-limiting decision by pulling him over." Murmurs spread through the gallery. Judge Wilson tapped her gavel once, restoring order. "Please continue, officer. I explained to the representative that my dash camera was recording our interaction, and that the school zone speed limit is non-negotiable due to child safety concerns. He then suggested that my supervisor would be hearing about this, and that funding for our department's next budget might be affected." Green's attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the simple matter of a traffic violation, on the contrary," Judge Wilson interrupted, "it speaks directly to your client's pattern of behavior and his attitude toward public safety and the law." She turned to the officer. "Was there anything else, Officer Rodriguez?" "Yes, Your Honor. When I returned with the citation, the representative refused to sign it, stating that, and I quote again, "Do you know how many judges I know? This won't stand." Officer Rodriguez's voice remained professional, but there was a hint of disappointment in his tone. The judge nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the increasingly uncomfortable politician. "Representative Green, you came into my courtroom today believing your position would shield you from consequences. Instead, you've demonstrated precisely why those consequences are necessary." She lifted another document. "I have here statements from 3 parents who witnessed your speed violation that day. One of them had to quickly pull her child back from the crosswalk when your car sped through. Another." Green finally seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. His previous arrogance melted away, replaced by growing concern. His attorney was now frantically whispering in his ear, but the damage had been done. Judge Wilson continued, her voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. "This court takes several factors into consideration when determining appropriate penalties. The severity of the violation itself, the defendant's attitude toward law enforcement, and most importantly, the potential risk to public safety." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The morning had grown later, and the courtroom had filled with more spectators, word having spread about the unfolding drama. Among them were several local reporters, their notebooks out, pens poised. "Representative Green, you've spent this morning reminding everyone of your position and power. Now, I'm going to remind you of something far more important. The true meaning of public service and responsibility." The judge reached for her gavel, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Whatever she was about to say next would undoubtedly make headlines across the state, but more importantly, it would serve as a reminder that justice, when properly served, could humble even the most entitled of individuals. Judge Wilson's next actions would become legendary in Washington County's judicial history. She reached beneath her bench and produced a USB drive, holding it up for all to see. "Representative Green, while you were attempting to intimidate Officer Rodriguez, his body camera was recording every word. The court would like to play this footage." A court clerk quickly set up a monitor facing the gallery. Green's attorney stood up, his voice urgent. "Your Honor, we object to this display." "Objection noted and overruled," Judge Wilson replied calmly. "The public has a right to see how their elected official conducts himself when he believes he's above the law." The footage began playing, and the courtroom watched in silence as the scene unfolded. On screen, Green's luxury car was pulled over, and his interaction with Officer Rodriguez played out exactly as described. But seeing it was different from hearing about it. The representative's condescending tone, his casual threats, and his obvious disdain for the law were all captured in high definition. What struck everyone most was the moment a young mother and her child appeared in the background of the footage, hurriedly stepping back from the crosswalk as Green's car had sped past just minutes earlier. The mother's frightened expression and protective grip on her child's hand spoke volumes. As the video ended, Judge Wilson addressed the court. "Mrs. Chen," she called out, and a woman in the gallery stood up, the same mother from the video. "Would you like to share your statement with the court?" Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her voice slightly trembling but determined. "I was picking up my daughter from her after-school art class. We were about to cross when this car," she gestured toward Green, "came speeding through. If I hadn't pulled my daughter back." She paused, composing herself. "My husband is deployed overseas protecting our country. The least we can expect is for our leaders to protect our children here at home." The impact of her words was visible on every face in the courtroom. Even Green had the decency to look ashamed, though his attorney was still busily writing notes. Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully before speaking again. "Representative Green, your actions that day endangered lives. Your behavior afterward demonstrated a disturbing belief that your position places you above the law. Today, you've continued to display that same attitude in my courtroom." She adjusted her glasses, looking directly at him. However, what concerns me most is not just your actions, but what they represent. The judge's words carried throughout the silent courtroom. Every day, parents trust that their children will be safe in school zones. Every day, citizens trust that their elected officials will uphold the laws they help create. And every day, people trust that justice will be served equally, regardless of position or power. Green's previous arrogance had completely evaporated. He sat rigidly in his chair, aware that every word of these proceedings would likely appear in tomorrow's newspapers. His political career, built on carefully maintained public appearances, was about to face its greatest test. Judge Wilson lifted another document from her bench. I've reviewed similar cases from the past 5 years in this jurisdiction. I've considered the aggravating factors in this case: your speed in a school zone, your attempt to intimidate a law enforcement officer, and your continued disrespect for these proceedings. She paused, making sure her next words would be clearly heard by everyone present. Representative Green, this court is ready to render its decision. The tension in courtroom 302 reached its peak. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, phones ready to break the news. The gallery waited in anticipation, knowing they were about to witness a moment of justice that would be remembered for years to come. Judge Wilson's voice carried the weight of justice as she delivered her decision. Before I announce my ruling, I want to address something that's been overlooked in these proceedings. Representative Green, you spoke earlier about your lengthy service to this community. Let's examine what service truly means. She gestured to Officer Rodriguez, who remained standing at attention. Officer Rodriguez serves this community by protecting our children, even when doing so might cost him professionally. Mrs. Chen's husband serves our country overseas, placing duty above personal comfort. The teachers and staff at Springfield Elementary serve by educating and safeguarding our future generation. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. True service, Representative Green, isn't about power or privilege. It's about responsibility and sacrifice for the greater good. Today, you'll learn about both. She lifted her verdict document, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. For the speeding violation in a school zone, this court finds you guilty. The standard fine would be $500. However, given the aggravating circumstances, your speed being triple the limit, your attempts to intimidate an officer, and your behavior in this courtroom, I am exercising my judicial discretion. Green's attorney straightened in his chair, sensing what was coming. Judge Wilson continued, the fine is set at $2,500, the maximum allowed by law. Additionally, your license will be suspended for 60 days, effective immediately. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, you will complete 200 hours of community service. This service will be performed at Springfield Elementary, where you will assist the crossing guards before and after school. You will wear a high-visibility vest identifying you as a community service worker, and you will help ensure the safety of the very children you endangered. Green's face flushed as he realized the public nature of his punishment. His attorney quickly whispered something in his ear, but Judge Wilson pressed on. You will also attend and complete a traffic safety course, and you will give a presentation to the school's Parent-Teacher Association about road safety and responsibility. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. But perhaps most importantly, Representative Green, you will write personal letters of apology to Officer Rodriguez, Mrs. Chen, and the parents of Springfield Elementary. These letters will acknowledge your understanding of why your actions were dangerous and how they betrayed the public trust. The gallery watched as Green seemed to shrink in his seat. His earlier bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by the realization that his actions would have very public consequences. One final thing, Judge Wilson added, her voice carrying a note of wisdom gained from years of experience. I want you to understand why I'm assigning these particular penalties. This isn't about humiliation, Representative Green. It's about education and redemption. By working alongside those who truly serve our community, perhaps you'll gain a better understanding of what public service really means. She looked around the courtroom, addressing everyone present. Let this case serve as a reminder that in this court, and in this country, no one is above the law. Position and power do not grant immunity from responsibility. In fact, they demand an even higher standard of conduct. The judge raised her gavel. You have 30 days to appeal this decision. However, given the video evidence and witness testimony, I strongly advise you to use that time instead to reflect on how you can better serve your community. Court is adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, but it was drowned out by the immediate buzz of whispered conversations and the rustle of reporters rushing to file their stories. Representative Green sat motionless, the full impact of the judge's decision still sinking in. The aftermath of Judge Wilson's verdict spread through the courthouse like wildfire. As Representative Green and his attorney huddled in quiet consultation, the hallway outside courtroom 302 buzzed with activity. Reporters rushed to file their stories, their fingers flying over phone screens as they raced to break the news that would soon dominate local headlines. But it was what happened next that truly surprised everyone. As Green gathered his belongings, Mrs. Chen approached him, her expression firm but compassionate. "Representative," she said, her voice steady, "I hope you understand why I had to speak up today. It wasn't about getting you in trouble. It was about our children." Green looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. The politician's carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing something rarely seen, genuine vulnerability. I understand," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your daughter, is she okay?" "She's fine," Mrs. Chen replied. "But she could have been hurt. Many children could have been hurt." She paused, then added, "You know, my daughter's art class, the one we were leaving that day, they're always looking for volunteers to help with their projects." The suggestion hung in the air, an olive branch extended where none was required. Green's expression shifted as he realized what she was offering, a way to begin his community service that might actually make a difference. Meanwhile, Officer Rodriguez was preparing to leave when Judge Wilson called him to her chambers. "Officer," she said once the door was closed, "I want to commend you for your professionalism throughout this incident. It couldn't have been easy, facing that kind of pressure." The officer stood straight, pride evident in his bearing. "Thank you, Your Honor. But I was just doing my job. Those kids' safety comes first, no matter who's behind the wheel." "That's exactly the point I wanted Representative Green to understand," Judge Wilson replied, removing her reading glasses. "Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from seeing true public service in action." Back in the hallway, Green's attorney was attempting to manage the growing media presence, but his client surprised him by stepping forward to face the reporters directly. The usual political polish was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility. He began, then cleared his throat and started again. "I want to make a statement about what happened today." The reporters' cameras focused on him, capturing every word. Judge Wilson was right. "I forgot something important, that leadership isn't about power or privilege. It's about responsibility." The courthouse staff, who had seen countless politicians make countless statements over the years, paused in their duties. Something in Green's voice was different. It wasn't the practiced sincerity of a career politician, it was the raw honesty of someone facing a genuine moment of truth. "Starting tomorrow," he continued, "I will begin my community service at Springfield Elementary. Not because I have to, but because I need to. Our children's safety should never be compromised, especially not by those elected to protect them." As Green spoke, Judge Wilson watched silently from her chamber doorway. Her years on the bench had taught her to read people, to distinguish genuine remorse from mere regret at being caught. What she saw in Green's face gave her hope that perhaps today's lesson would stick. The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. In its light, something remarkable was happening. A story that had begun with arrogance and disrespect was transforming into one of humility and redemption. The next morning dawned crisp and clear as Representative Green arrived at Springfield Elementary for his first day of community service. He stood awkwardly in his high-visibility vest, a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. The school's crossing guard coordinator, Mrs. Thompson, a retired teacher with 30 years of experience, gave him a knowing look as she handed him his stop sign. "The morning shift starts at 7:15 sharp," she explained, her tone professional but kind. "These children and their parents trust us to keep them safe. That trust is earned every single day, one crossing at a time." Green nodded, remembering Judge Wilson's words about true public service. As the first students began arriving, he felt surprisingly nervous, more nervous than he'd ever been giving speeches at political rallies. This was different. This was real responsibility. A small group of parents had gathered across the street, some taking pictures with their phones. Green could hear their whispers and see their skeptical glances. He knew videos of his court appearance had already gone viral on social media, with millions viewing Judge Wilson's powerful rebuke of his behavior. But something unexpected happened as the morning progressed. A little boy approached the crossing, clutching his mother's hand. It was the same child who had almost been hit by Green's car that fateful day. The boy looked up at Green, then at his new vest and stop sign. "Are you helping Mr. Rodriguez keep us safe now?" the child asked innocently, referring to the police officer who had originally ticketed Green. Green felt a lump in his throat. "Yes," he managed to say. "Yes, I am. And I promise to do a good job." The boy's mother, Mrs. Chen, gave Green a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a tiny gesture, but it carried the weight of possibility, the possibility of redemption. As the morning rush continued, Green found himself growing more comfortable with his role. He helped a kindergartner who had dropped her lunchbox, waited patiently as an elderly grandfather slowly crossed with his grandchildren, and even managed to earn a few grateful smiles from hurrying parents. During a quiet moment, Officer Rodriguez drove by on his patrol. He slowed down, observing Green at work. Their eyes met briefly, and the officer gave a professional nod, not quite approval, but acknowledgement of Green's efforts to make amends. News cameras showed up mid-morning, hoping to catch the humbled politician in his court-mandated service. But instead of the story they expected, of a disgraced representative suffering through punishment, they found something different. They saw a man learning, step by step, what it meant to truly serve his community. During his break, Green sat on a bench near the school entrance, watching the children play at recess. The school principal approached him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," she said, offering him one of the cups, "we've been trying to get the city council to approve additional funding for crossing guard equipment for years." Green looked up, suddenly interested. "What kind of equipment?" "Better lighting for early morning crossings, updated signs, maybe even some solar-powered warning systems," she explained. "But the budget always seems to go elsewhere." The politician in Green wanted to immediately promise to champion the cause, to turn this into a political win. But his recent experience had taught him something about humility and genuine service. Instead, he asked, "Could you show me the proposal? I'd like to understand the needs better." Back at the courthouse, Judge Wilson received her first update on Green's community service. As she read the report, a slight smile crossed her face. Sometimes, justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. 2 weeks into his community service, Representative Green found himself standing before the Springfield Elementary Parent-Teacher Association, but not as the confident politician he once was. The school's gymnasium was packed with parents, teachers, and community members, all curious to hear what the humbled representative would say. When Judge Wilson sentenced me to give this presentation about traffic safety, he began, his voice carrying a new note of sincerity, I thought it was just another part of my punishment. I was wrong. He paused, looking around the room at the familiar faces he'd come to know during his morning crossing guard duties. 2 weeks ago, I knew about power. I knew about influence. I knew about getting things done in committee rooms and behind closed doors. But I didn't know about true responsibility until I stood on that corner with a stop sign, watching your children cross the street. The audience sat in rapt attention as Green shared what he'd learned. He told them about little acts of kindness he'd witnessed, older students helping younger ones tie their shoelaces, parents bringing hot coffee to crossing guards on cold mornings, and teachers arriving early to ensure every child started their day with a smile. But I've also seen the challenges, he continued, pulling up a presentation on the projector. Our crossing guards need better equipment. Our school zones need better lighting. And I'm not saying this as a politician making promises. I'm saying this as someone who now understands why these things matter. In the back of the room, Officer Rodriguez stood watching, still in his patrol uniform. He'd stopped by after his shift, curious about the man who had once threatened his career. The change he witnessed was remarkable. Green then did something unexpected. He stepped away from the podium and walked to the center of the gymnasium floor. I'd like to share a video with you, he said, nodding to the technical assistant. The screen lit up with footage from his dashcam the day of his violation, showing his car speeding through the school zone. This is who I was, he said quietly. Someone who thought his time was more important than your children's safety. Then he played Officer Rodriguez's body camera footage, showing his own arrogant behavior during the traffic stop. The audience watched in silence as the former version of Green attempted to bully his way out of a ticket. And this, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, is who I'm trying to become. He played a new video, footage taken just that morning, showing him helping children cross the street, checking for cars, and ensuring every child made it safely to school. Mrs. Chen, sitting in the front row, wiped away a tear as she watched. Her husband, recently returned from deployment, squeezed her hand. Their daughter, the same one who had almost been hit by Green's car, was now drawing a picture of her new friend, the crossing guard who helped her every morning. Judge Wilson taught me something profound, Green continued. She showed me that true justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. She could have just fined me and sent me on my way. Instead, she gave me the opportunity to understand why what I did was wrong, and how to make it right. The presentation concluded with Green unveiling a detailed proposal for improving school zone safety, not as a political initiative, but as a community-driven project developed in consultation with parents, teachers, and safety experts. The plan included input from Officer Rodriguez and was built on real needs observed during his community service. On the final day of Representative Green's community service, Courtroom 302 was once again filled to capacity. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. Judge Wilson sat at her bench, reviewing a thick folder of completion reports, testimonials, and documentation of Green's 60 days of service. Representative Green, she began, her voice carrying the same authority but with a hint of satisfaction, you stand before this court having completed your sentenced community service. However, I understand you have something you'd like to address before we proceed. Green stood, no longer the arrogant politician who had first entered her courtroom. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice clear and humble. With the court's permission, I'd like to share something with you. At Judge Wilson's nod, the doors opened, and in walked a group of people, Mrs. Chen and her family, Officer Rodriguez, the school principal, and several crossing guards who had worked alongside Green. Each carried a letter or document. Your Honor, Green continued, when you sentenced me, you said it was about education and redemption, not humiliation. I didn't understand then, but I do now. He gestured to Officer Rodriguez, who stepped forward with a folder. These are proposals for comprehensive school zone safety improvements across our county, Green explained. Not political promises, actual, funded plans developed with law enforcement, school administrators, and parents. The funding was approved yesterday, reallocated from my office's discretionary budget. Mrs. Chen stepped forward next, holding up a children's book. Representative Green helped our students create this book about school zone safety, she said. It's being distributed to every elementary school in the district. The judge listened as, one by one, community members shared stories of transformation, not just Green's, but how his service had sparked broader changes in the community. The Crossing Guard program had received record volunteer applications. Parents were more engaged in school safety initiatives. Even local businesses had joined in, sponsoring safety equipment and improvements. Your Honor, Green said finally. My sentenced community service ends today, but I've submitted paperwork to continue volunteering as a crossing guard one morning a week. These past 60 days haven't been a punishment, they've been a gift. A gift of perspective, of understanding what true public service means. Judge Wilson removed her reading glasses, studying the man before her. Representative Green, when you first entered this courtroom, you spoke of position and power. Today, you speak of service and responsibility. That transformation is precisely what justice, at its best, should achieve. She lifted her gavel but paused. However, let this case stand as a reminder to all that in this courtroom, and in this country, the law applies equally to everyone. Position and power don't elevate you above responsibility, they demand more of it. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom one final time. Case closed, Judge Wilson declared, allowing herself a small smile. As people filed out of the courtroom, Officer Rodriguez approached Green. You know, he said, there's an opening on the police advisory board. We could use someone who understands both sides of the law. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Green, but his response wasn't what anyone expected. If you want a real story, he said, come to Springfield Elementary tomorrow morning. Watch our crossing guards in action. See what real public service looks like. Back in her chambers, Judge Wilson watched through her window as Green chatted with Mrs. Chen's daughter, who was showing him her latest art project. The judge thought about all the cases she'd presided over, all the judgments she'd rendered. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful form of justice wasn't found in punishments or fines, but in the opportunity for someone to become better than they were. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, just as it had on that first dramatic day. But now those shadows fell on a changed man, a strengthened community, and a powerful reminder that justice, when properly served, could transform not just one person, but an entire community.